Did you miss me? I'm back. Let's get down to business. Let's start with the administrative stuff. So far, you've turned in, I believe, 4 discussions, and they just keep getting better and better and better. I'm quite impressed with this last discussion about Matheson's I Am Legend. Frankly, every time I read a post, I find it hard to comment because the only comments I can come up with are good job or great point. I'm quite impressed. I think it'll be very beneficial if when you write your papers or if you're working on the revisions before you submit them by midnight on Monday, that you really start applying a lot of these ideas that we've been discussing, using your knowledge of new historicism in putting that together. You know, definitely before you submit, take one last pass over it. Check it over. Make sure everything is as you want it to be. I want the strongest papers possible. And if you have even a little bit of what you've done so far, I think those papers are going to be quite impressive. So don't forget, they are due Monday at midnight on Turnitin. If you have not set up a Turnitin account, please make sure you get on that. I'd also like to mention, I hope you've enjoyed I Am Legend. I know I have. It's been quite a good book. Really impressed. I just had no idea how good it was until we started reading it. There's a lot that we've talked about, and I think for some of you this will be a really good place to start on your paper. You know, especially the conversations we had about minorities and race, and you know how that novel uses sort of suburbanization, or even talking about communism, or the Red Scares and Cold War and post-war America will be definitely great topics to explore in your papers. But of course, we also have another novel in this unit that we need to talk about right now. Next up is Robert Heinlein's 1959 novel Starship Troopers, which won the 1960 Hugo Award. It is one of Heinlein's 32 novels, and according to Isaac Asimov, Heinlein was one of the greatest science fiction writers in existence. The novel explores themes of civic and social duty, politics, and responsibility. Many people often consider it fascist or somewhat totalitarian, and if you have ever seen the film, which was made in 1997 by Paul Verhoeven, it certainly plays on those themes, especially at the end. Spoiler alert, Neil Patrick Harris is dressed like a Nazi SS officer, and that film is a little bit more satirical, whereas Heinlein's novel plays a lot of this quite straight. Heinlein graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1929, though he never did serve in active duty. He was discharged for pulmonary tuberculosis. In 1958, he wrote an essay about nuclear testing, which he was in support of. A number of science fiction writers came out against him, and in a lot of ways, this novel serves as a political treatise on those ideas. Interestingly, the critical discourse in the novel has been rather splintered. In one camp, we have people claiming that it promotes militaristic ideals, which, frankly, I think is hard to disagree with. Also, there are allegations of fascism, which, as I mentioned before, is probably most obvious in the film version. Interestingly, sort of referring back to novels like Brave New World, there's also been accusations that it is a utopian novel as well, which, when you consider the world that they live in, the characters like Johnny Rico, where only veterans can vote, and essentially in order to be a citizen, you have to perform some kind of service, typically in the military, for the Terran Foundation. This idea could be a potentially interesting one to discuss when we get into the forums. Lastly, and probably most fascinating for this class, there's been some allegations that the novel is itself racist. According to people like Robert Peterson or John Brunner, there are racist elements to the novel. Remember, this is 1959. It's 6 years after the end of the Korean War. And according to these critics, they suggest that because the arachnid enemies of the Terran Foundation are often referred to as bugs and skinnies, and these are unthinking, mindless creatures that essentially you just want to step on the same way you do ants. They draw the parallel to calling Asians, specifically Koreans, names like gooks. They're saying that these are racial epithets in the novel, and to an extent, there is some credence to it. So definitely keep that reading in mind as we get into the forums. It will be interesting to compare those possibilities to the way we looked at the racial possibilities of I Am Legend as well. And before I go, I'd like to just make a quick mention about military science fiction, or what it is. Of course, we have a more substantial reading to take a look at to help us define this thing, but there's a quote from author David Weber that I'd like to bring to your attention. He says, "For me, military science fiction is science fiction which is written about a military situation, with a fundamental understanding of how military lifestyles and characters differ from civilian lifestyles and characters. It is science fiction which attempts to realistically portray the military within a science fiction context. It is not just bugs shoots. It is about human beings, and about members of other species caught up in warfare and carnage. It isn't an excuse for simplistic solutions to problems." In other words, military science fiction is about the warfare, yes, and the tactics and the weaponry, but it's also about ideas. And Heinlein's novel is very much a novel about ideas. It's definitely something to look for. That's it for this week. I'll see you next Monday.